Hello, this is the Nolan Bilinga podcast. I am Nolan Bilinga, the host, and today we're joined by Conor Carroll. Conor was a sommelier for 10 years, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yep.
Um, he is currently my campaign manager, and he's managed a few campaigns in the past. He's a winner. He always wins, I'll tell you that. He's worked for Future PAC and is also a master's student in political science at Portland State University. He's studying political extremism and inequality in elections and campaigns. So he's got a lot of insight that he can bring to the table. Conor, thank you for coming on to the show. I know you're a big advocate for progressive policies. I know you're working on campaigns. You've studied the political world. So the question is, why are you so involved with politics?
Man, thank you, Nolan, for having me. Appreciate it. I know you and we see each other plenty, but it's always nice to be in this medium. Yeah, so I mean, and this is something that you and I have spoken about, I think, fairly consistently. Is I unfortunately was houseless for almost 5 years of my life, a little over 4 years, and it was a level of frustration I didn't really quite understand. And this is, there are many reasons why this happened to me, of course, but I think that the majority of Americans don't really understand what it is to be a part of an unequal system, an inequitable system, and it just sort of passes them by. And so I didn't want to be a participant in that kind of system. And so what I wanted, for my life at least, was to be able to be loud and be upset, frankly, about the level of inequity and the nature of our system of governance. And what I understood to be true was that in order to do such a thing, you had to pursue it through avenues of power. And academia is one of those places, um, as well as the voting system, as well as campaigning. So I figured, hey, let's just kind of thread them together and start working in campaign worlds, start getting into politics properly, and to start helping young progressives like yourself have an avenue to do the very thing that you're doing now, which is running for Congress, running for political office. And I think it behooves all of us to understand that the dangers involved of not participating. And so that's why I'm here.
Exactly. Democracy isn't a spectator sport.
That's right. That's right.
It's an act. You've got to act in democracy in order for it to work. With housing, because you've been houseless before. I've experienced it at one point before. With the housing crisis, how do we fix that? And how do we start helping folks get off the streets as well?
Man, it's a big question. It's a very large question. I think, frankly, and we have again spoken about this before, but I think one of the more important things to do when you're trying to address a something so systemic within our society is to go to first principles. And so just like Carl Sagan said, like the famous physicist, like you always bring it back to first principles. And what that means is looking at the nature of the problem itself. And it is not one of lack of resources. It is not one of redistribution of wealth or socialist policies or some nonsense. It is a problem of mental health. It is a problem of inequality in the economic and political systems of power in this country. And it is a problem of allocation of proper resources. And that requires political will. And frankly, that is, I mean, that's why I'm a progressive. That's why I believe what I believe, because you have to be realistic about these things and what needs to happen. So it needs to just be, frankly, like we need to tax the rich properly. We need to put systems in order where there is affordable housing at any time of day for any person that needs it. It's about understanding that this is not just some economic problem. This is a policy problem. There is ways to fix this. This isn't just the nature of the thing. Unfettered capitalism has been proven time and time again to not be able to fix this problem. And so we need to have the government step in and understand the actual problem itself. And so I think that the problem starts there.
No, I agree with you. We've seen Jeff Bezos. There's an article you said to me. It showed Jeff Bezos was making over $7.9 million
An hour last year.
and his net worth is at 190 billion at this point. And so when folks can't even afford, a place to live, can't afford their rent.
I mean, they can't afford even more than that, man. I mean,
They can't afford
not just the roof over their head. Yeah, yeah.
There's also,
I mean, like, not to cut you off, but Merriam-Webster just added greedflation to their lexicon. Greedflation's like a real thing. Like, yeah, I had a professor tell me he didn't even know what that word meant, and it's a real thing, and it's basically using inflation as a corporate sort of cudgel in order to generate profit for their shareholders. And it's a real word now, thankfully, but it's using inflation as an exactly.
That's wild. I know there's that Harvard study also that showed that for half of all U.S. renters, that rent is now just unaffordable. It's taking up at like the least is 30% of their income
minimum,
and people just can't afford it anymore.
Yeah.
And then you have places like where we live in Portland. It's extremely high. It's
absolutely
exactly. Oh man, you always hear the rich get richer, the poor get poorer.
Yeah.
We're going to start solving that problem.
That's why we're
Jeff
here,
Bezos, right? He's dodging taxes. It's a wild thing.
Yeah.
You mentioned with money in politics, inequality in elections and campaigns. What is the big issue around money being in politics, and how can we start to remedy that problem? How do we fix it?
Man, I like that you're taking this sort of route here. And again, apologies if you can hear my stupid dog in the background. He's a yappy boy. Apologies there. But yeah, so I like that you're talking about fixes because frankly, that's what progressive politics is all about. Is about providing fixes to problems that already exist. You and I are both well aware of why the system exists as it does. Things like Citizens United, for instance, the Supreme Court of the United States is one of the most oligarchic institutions that we are deigned to interact with on a daily basis. But to create the notion and have the sort of undergirded nature of treating capital the same as people, and that is a systemic issue. It pervades everything from the houselessness we were just talking about, the housing market, and into campaigns and electioneering. But the nature of treating a person the same as money is inherent, I think, in the issues that we're facing here. So first things first, codified the overturn of Citizens United and other rulings like it, like Buckley v. Vallejo. I know I'm getting a little granular here, so I apologize to listeners, but these are readily available cases you can just stick into your search browser and see how legitimately unfair they are. But treating humans as capital and vice versa is a huge systemic issue that needs to be codified immediately in a statutory manner. But also just the inherence of how, like, what it means to be in an election, like what it means to campaign. You and I have been experiencing this, I think. But there's this level of sort of like it's pettiness almost, where they treat underfunded, like they treat the nature of a campaign and their success rate via the amount of money that they raise and how they raise it. And so, like, if you're not an institutionalist, if you're not part of the power dynamic writ large, you are treated in a way that, frankly, we are treated, and other campaigns are treated in the same way. Progressivism tends to receive this level of degradation on a state-by-state basis. You can go to any state and see the same phenomena happening. It's a measurable and quantifiable thing. Someone should do a study on it, frankly. But it's in order to treat this problem, just like with housing, just like with any of these big issues that progressivism tries to treat, you have to look at it at first principles. You have to look at it as, like, what is the actual issue? And the issue is how we look at money writ large and how we look at people. And so, yeah, no, in order to fix the money in politics thing and money in campaigning especially, we have to codify the overturn of Citizens. We have to understand that it is not okay for a democracy to gaslight and to be an oligopoly. Like, it's just not a thing we can do.
Exactly. There's thrown around people talking about things like publicly funded campaigns, ranked choice votings.
Yeah.
How, would you agree with those things? And how would that come into play? What would that
Well,
change if we implement those things?
that's tough, and this is very granular. You're correct about that. About this being a tough decision and a tough dialogue. Um, First and foremost, I mean, Portland is about to do itself. I mean, this is quite prescient that you're speaking of this. Portland is about to do a grand experiment in ranked choice voting itself. There is I think it's June 15th, I think is when it ends, where you can submit yourself as a candidate for Portland City Council. But this is going to be an experiment in ranked choice voting. And so I think that as far as that part of this equation that you're discussing is concerned, this is going to be a good data set. Not to get too grad school on us here, but I think this will be an important data set, and states around the country are experimenting with this. Um, as far as outside of ranked choice voting, um, I think it's sort of foolish to think that something like public funding of campaigns is going to be, um, excuse me, a viability in this country where we are so, the sort of the ethos of American capitalism is very much individualism, as I'm sure you are aware, and it very much pervades political speech and rhetoric and also action. And so I don't know if something like a publicly funded campaign would ever be embraced, even by the progressive class. Frankly, I mean, I think that that's how systemic the individualism in American politicking, like realpolitik, even exists. So I don't know if something like that would be some kind of salve for this, but I do think that there are options we have. And like I spoke about earlier, I mean, it literally starts with getting these dark dollars out of politicking, out of campaigning, out of electioneering. If you can't tell where the money comes from, it shouldn't be there in the first place. End of story. I just, and there are ways to do that. I mean, look, I mean, the IRS just came out with that report saying that, like, what is it? Just from the limited funding they've received alone, just from getting staffed up alone, they're going to drag in 560 billion a year in tax revenue from the 1%. Like, that's an amazing and astounding number. That completely obliterates, like, 4 times over, the poverty gap. And so there are fixes to this. There are ways to do this, but it can't be something that's outside of the comfort zone of the typical American, because you need the voters on your side. You have to have them. And as deleterious as that might be to true progressivism, it's a thing you have to address.
Yep. You do have this they're like competing values, individualism and collectivism, and both of them have valid points behind them, and so how do you work between both of them to solve the big issues without just limiting people's freedoms when America is we're really based on those individual liberties in a lot of ways. So that it's a fantastic
No,
point to bring it up there.
yeah, no, I think, thank you. And I think that's a really important thing to try and square this circle, so to speak. We have, as a species, decide not to get so granular here, but, like, frankly, we have made the decision that living together is better than living apart. It's a values based judgment, as you said, that we have made as a people, as an entity on planet Earth. And considering we are so prevalent in I mean, like, look at climate change, look at all these things, right? Pollution. We are incredibly inert when it comes to these things. And so I think to we're not this isn't progressivism, and what I'm espousing right now is not to disregard the individual. It is to embrace the individual. But what it is doing is acknowledging the fucking fact, the empirical fact, that we are all together, braided together. If we're gonna have any shot whatsoever at going forward into the future here, hundreds of years, thousands of years, even as a species. And I'm not trying. I know this sounds like an Elon Musk TED talk right here, so, like, please forgive me. But I think it's really important that we acknowledge that to embrace the individual is to sort of necessarily disregard the group. And to disregard the individual doesn't mean we're actually doing that. It just means we're acknowledging the fact that we must come together, build these bridges, build these coalitions. If we have any chance at things like defeating fascism that's on the rise right now, like, actually fighting against climate change, bringing us all together, like bringing people off the streets and bringing them into houses. I mean, like, things that are so base and simple sounding need to be put in a quantifiable way, and that way you can look at what is the difference between the individual and the collective, because they're not that different. They really aren't. It just requires the political will and the acknowledgement of the fact that they are not necessarily the same. And that I know I got a little off track there, but I think that answers your question a little bit.
Oh, I do. I think it brings some context to it. And you're mentioning like building bridges, especially in the terms of climate change, right? Is to tackle something like climate change, we've got to have everybody on board in some kind of way. And with us having bad international relations with a lot of other countries that we need on board, we've got politicians in our own company or in our own country that call it a hoax. And you think, imagine just for a second, like, what if these politicians are wrong, that it's not a hoax, and that 99% of the scientists that are studying this as their career, they're actually right about
their life. This is their life.
Yeah, this is their life that's studying this. They say that climate change is real and that we've got to do something about it. That's a major thing in this country, and it needs to be talked about, obviously. What are things to those people that may not believe in climate change? They think it's a hoax. What are some main points that we can give to them to show them that this is worth talking about, that it's a real issue, that we've got to address it?
Yeah, that's thank you again. That's a really important question. I think that, and again, not to get too granular and too sort of, thesis statement direct here, but like, it's this is a problem. We are facing an epidemic of anti-science rhetoric and belief patterns in this country. It's happening elsewhere, but America is one of the densest populations of people that believe that that science, like the like the scientific method, doesn't hold weight. That's a systemic and huge issue. If those are policymakers, people making rules, people making laws, determining life for others around them, and they don't believe in the scientific method, that's a huge problem. I think that addressing, like, and this is the thing, like you said it yourself, no matter what you or I say right here on this format and in this way, is necessarily going to change their minds, because of the way that our politicization of things, like data and facts, it has decimated the faith that people have in institutions. I mean, like, recent polling has shown, I mean, Jesus, you can look at Pew or any, Harris poll, whatever. They are all only ever aligned in one thing, and that's that people are unhappy with the status quo. And that means governments. That means the people that run things and write laws. And so I know I'm getting a little off track, and I apologize, but I think it's important to address something that sort of undergirds this writ large, and that is the fact that we are facing an epidemic of anti-science policy. It goes from anti-abortionism to these theocratic measures you see all throughout the country and throughout the world, frankly, and it brings it all the way home to climate change, anthropogenic climate change, particularly. So what I would recommend to anyone trying to get this across to, like, uncle at Thanksgiving, or a person in your class that just is like determined to not understand or care for these kind of data sets, is to find the thing that is most easily understood by those who don't really care for things like science, and that requires the dumbing down of some stuff. I hate to say it that way, but it does require us to make it more palatable to the consumer of average news, which the average consumer of news in this country is on social media. It's TikTok, it's Facebook, it's what have you. So condensing it, making the messaging clear and concise. I mean, part of what I do for a living is to create messaging that is clear and concise. I mean, that's just what you have to do, frankly. But I think that it's important that you find the easiest data sets to understand as a consumer of real life import. So like, look at these like literally science. I don't know if you saw this. Maybe I probably sent you a link to it or something. But as I am apt to do in the vague hours of the night, is like looking like scientists are going to have to reclassify hurricanes. They have to introduce category 6, and it's not because they can't explain it. It's because they can explain it that they must do this. That like look at like the destruction levels, how much it's costing all of us to deal with these climate disasters, these fires that are happening, these hurricanes, all of this is literally traceable to the amount of carbon we put into the atmosphere. End of story. And to give it a closed loop like that is very consumable for the average voter. And I think that's important that we remember that. And this is not to degrade them. Average people like you and I'm sorry, we're fucking busy. We're busy. We're doing stuff. We are working every day. We are in school. We are paying bills. We are, taking care of our pets. We are with our partners. We're doing whatever we must just to get by. And so to create a thing that is is palatable and consumable in a snap judgment is critical to getting people on board with understanding climate change. I hope that answered your question.
No, that was a perfect answer to the question. I think it leads me right into, because you're explaining getting that messaging out to help people understand what are the things that we as a collective for the society, what do we actually need to do to tackle climate change?
Yeah, so well, I mean, I touched on this briefly. I'll keep this short, but I touched on it briefly here. We have to make decarbonization sexy. We have to make these things like, and I think like we're seeing this not to take away from the climate aspect of things, but we're seeing this frankly with like voting rights and like with voting access. Like we're seeing Taylor Swift talking about doing those posts online with like I just voted and all this stuff, and unfortunately has now become the ire of the far right and politicians. I can't believe I'm saying politicians here as a qualifier, like Donald Trump, but like we need to make this culturally palatable because it is. We must bring it to the fore that this matters to people, their children, like even if you're not a person that has children, even if it doesn't matter. But if we are to survive this, because we are in a crisis. I mean, this has been established by like you said, 99 point whatever % of scientists on planet Earth understand that anthropogenic climate change is real and that it is destroying this planet. And I am particularly worried as an animal lover of the whole the destruction of the biomes. Maybe you saw that report about the Atlantic Ocean literally just basically being a dead zone now. I mean, it's horrific to see the data, but we need to decarbonize, and in a sexy way to make people get on board policy wise. We must start utilizing things like carbon capture and all those kind of retroactive things may be wonderful, but we need to find more active processes. So like solar, and understanding that is one of the greatest assets we have anywhere on planet Earth when it comes to decarbonizing, but also just to literally giving free energy. Like think about that. We could literally, through wind and solar, if we approached it properly, we could give free energy to anyone that wanted it. Like it's literally just a lack of political will. I think frankly, like I could talk about the science plenty and the policies that are there, but I think it's sort of a null hypothesis if you're thinking about what we can do when it's what we won't do. That's the problem, is that we won't do this. And it's not we as in you and I. It's we as in the collective, the royal we. And these are these assholes in Washington that won't, they just don't, they either don't care, which is a problem in its own right, or they don't understand, which is probably even a bigger problem. And in order to even get to the point of like signing a bill that's like fine, done, no more subsidies for big oil, no more, no more drilling on indigenous land, no more creation of institutions that demoralize decarbonization like we're seeing all the time. And I get jazzed up when I think about this, but it's frankly, it's the lack of political will. It's our greatest adversary right now because the tech is there. We have it. That's what I mean. Like it isn't like one specific thing. This is going to take some serious work. This is going to be hard.
So we need especially the young folks too, like Gen Z and millennials, some of them younger folks to get involved, to actually stand up and do something.
Yep.
If they don't do something, if we don't do something, then my generation won't have a whole lot to look forward to if we're letting folks from the generations that are about to leave us make all these decisions. So young folks need to get involved. We need some skin in the game so that we don't end up with a destroyed planet in the next half a century. So
less,
it's a great
point. Less than that.
Exactly. But Conor, I really appreciate you coming on the show. You gave a ton of insight. There's lots of issues that we have to tackle, and we have to keep tackling. There is a lot of people that I know that are tackling the issues, just like you and me. We've got a campaign. We're trying to do something about it, but we need more people than that. So thank you for coming on and giving some insight on this such.
I'm happy to be here, Nolan, and I think just as a closing sort of recognition, I think it's important that we acknowledge the fact that this is what it requires. This is the work. This is what democracy looks like, and in order to have any shot going forward of democracy living and like actually participating in the process itself, I don't know if we can go any further than just simply identifying these real first principle problems, and that's fighting autocracy and fascism, that's addressing crises as they come, like climate change, and that's frankly just getting people who have a stake in the game involved.
Exactly. All right. Thank you for your time, Conor. Join us next time on the Nolan Bilingual Podcast.